Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Martin, and I'm very happy to have you with me today. For this week's episode, I've got Shuan Ryan for you. And Shuan shared the stage with me down in LA last month for the Psychedelic Awakening event. And he and I were the quote-unquote panel talking about 5-MeO-DMT. And I really enjoyed meeting Shuan and getting a chance to get to know him a little bit. And thought it would be great to invite him onto the podcast for a full conversation, and that's what I have for you here today. We'll get to that in just a minute, but first, a few announcements. And actually, now that I'm recording this and I can hear myself, I do want to apologize. I've had a cold all week, so you can probably hear that I'm a little bit squeaky, so I sound a little funny. Hopefully, the cold will leave soon, and I will go back to my non-squeaky self. Of course, before we get to the interview with Shuan, let's get through some announcements, shall we? This week, I want to thank Brooke, as I do each and every month, who has set up a small donation via PayPal. And Brooke, you've been at it for years now. You're awesome. You rock. You know that. And also want to thank Brainheart for signing up at the God Molecule level of patronage over at my Patreon page over this past week. And we've already had our first 1-hour video call. That was awesome. And also thank to Rebecca, who signed up at the Spore level. So I had new patrons at the top and at the bottom, or at the beginning and at the end, in the alpha and the omega. So sweet. If you would like to support me over at Patreon, it's quite easy. Just stop by my personal webpage at martinball.net and use the Patreon link at the top right of the page, or just go directly to Patreon at patreon.com/martinwball. Sign up at the level that is comfortable for you and reflects what kind of access and bonuses and gifts you want to receive. There's no obligation. You can come and go as you like. You can change it anytime, and you can also sign up as a free supporter over at Patreon, where you get to see the posts that I make that are available for the public, but not the posts that I make only for the paid supporters over at Patreon. So anyway, that's always a possibility. Also, as a reminder, I have made the AI Art Imagined illustrated version of the Solendarian game, which is available as a PDF over at my Patreon shop at a reduced price of 50% off now through December 1st. Coming up next week here on the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast will be the last 2 chapters and the short epilogue of the audiobook of the Solendarian games. We're going to be wrapping that up and moving on to the next story, which is Book 2 or Volume 2 of Tales of Arduin, The Fate of Morani. Of course, my audiobooks are available at Audible, Amazon, and the iBookstore/Apple Bookstore if you want to go out and get them. I do recommend listening to Oribai's Vision or reading Oribai's Vision before we get to Volume 2, The Fate of Morani. But of course, the choice is up to you, and I did release the full audiobook of Oribai's Vision here on the podcast a few years ago. So if you've been a long-time listener, well, relatively long-time listener, I've been doing this for almost 17 years now. But if you've listened consistently over the past several years, then you remember Oribai's Vision. Coming up after we wrap up the Solendarian game, my next interview is with Dr. Zin and her team, talking all about subcuticle injections of 5-MeO-DMT. It's a really fascinating conversation, and it was all spurred on by, I was contacted by Dr. Zin, who said, hey, I would love for my team and I to come to Ashland and make this experience available to you. And this is something that I have not yet experienced, is a subcutaneous injection of 5-MeO-DMT. And you can learn all about it in the next interview that'll come out in 2 weeks here in the podcast. And if you're a West Coaster, if you live in Southern Oregon or perhaps Northern California, the Dr. Zin and her team are looking to make this available for others as well. Keep in mind, I am not organizing this. I am not doing this. This is just something that I'm going to be participating in. They do work as a religious nonprofit, and so they do seek to claim their religious freedom rights for what they are doing. And if you are interested, you can shoot me an email at martinwball@gmail.com, and then I can put you in touch with the team, and they will be organizing when, where, and how they serve people injectable 5-MeO-DMT. But if you're curious about it, that'll be the interview that's coming out in 2 weeks from today. And my last announcement is my usual reminder that I'm available for 30, 60, and 90-minute integration and consultation calls to help you integrate your 5-MeO-DMT or other entheogenic experience from a non-dual and energetic perspective. You can stop by at www.nondualentheogenicintegration.com if you want more info, or just shoot me an email, again at martinwball@gmail.com. Lastly, I just want to give a shout out to all the new students who are participating in the Mindscape Psychedelic Institute's 5-MeO-DMT Facilitator Training course. We just started with the next batch of students, and coming up in just an hour from the moment I am saying this, I will be teaching my first full class with the second round of students with the Mindscape Psychedelic Institute. So just want to give a shout out to all those new students, and looking forward to getting to know you over the next 5 to 6 months and seeing you on a regular basis on Zoom, where we can talk about all things 5-MeO-DMT and what it takes to be a facilitator with knowledge, trustworthiness, compassion, presence, awareness, and, as the course likes to bill itself, also being trauma-informed. So looking forward to seeing all of you guys very soon and regularly over the next 5 to 6 months. All right, that's enough for announcements. Let's get into this great conversation with Shuan Ryan. He has his website available if you want to check it out. It is divineguidance.me. Once again, that's divineguidance.me. And here is my conversation with Shuan, discussing his own process of coming to work with entheogenic medicines for his own personal healing, how he got into working with ayahuasca, his training there, and his work with 5-MeO-DMT and facilitating these healing medicines for his clientele and patronage. Here we go. Enjoy. Okay, I'm welcoming on to the Entheogenic Evolution podcast today, Shuan Ryan. And Shuan and I have just worked together to overcome technological difficulties in order to have this conversation today. So it's been a stressful past 43 minutes, but we had technical problems on my end and then on Shuan's end, and we had to do some workarounds, but now we're here. So Shuan, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Martin. It's so good to be here with you.
Yeah. So, what I like to do on the podcast is sometimes it's sort of my excuse to kind of get to know people. And we've gotten to know each other just a little bit. But this is what I was looking forward to, is like, here's my opportunity to really get to know Shuan and ask him a bunch of questions and have him really introduce himself. So I'm going to give you a brief introduction and then going to be turning it over to you. So Shuan and I were brought together by a circumstance where we both spoke on stage at the Psychedelic Awakening event that happened just the other weekend down in Los Angeles. And Shuan and I did not know each other prior to that. We did have a short conversation just to get to know each other a little bit before being up on stage. And I just thought, well, if I'm sharing a stage with Shuan, I want to know him more and bring him onto the podcast. So Shuan, here you are. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. It's good to be here. It's good to know you now. It was actually really nice to connect with you. I've been working with 5-MeO for years, and one of my dear friends, I had served him, and he got into your book, Entheogenic Liberation, and shared that with me. And so I read through some of it. So I'm familiar with you. And it was good to kind of have that full circle connection, especially at the Awakening Conference, and then to share the stage with you. Fantastic. I thought we had a really good balance, the two of us.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I always complain about time at conferences like this, that it's could have been up there for a lot longer. I mean, there's just so much to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we could at least another hour and then the Q&A.
Yeah. There really wasn't enough time for enough questions and all that. But, that's the nature of conferences. But I always try and warn people. I don't get invited to speak all too often, but when I do, I like to tell them, give me as much time as you have, because I do have a lot of information to share. But have you done previous talks? I think you had mentioned that maybe you worked with the Paul Karasik for the previous event that happened.
Yeah, I was part of the very first one last year. For that event, I was in the jungle, so I wasn't able to make it. But the very first one, I was part of that. And I was on the 5-MeO panel then as well. And another panel or two.
Yeah. So were those your first public speaking events? Or have you done other ones?
For medicine, yes. For entheogens, for sure. That was.
Okay. Well, great. Well, Shuan, like I said, this is our opportunity to get to know you more. I say our, like, I guess me, and I'm speaking figuratively of the audience out there. But I've got your website up here, divineguidance.me. And as you've already mentioned that you work with 5-MeO-DMT. And as you may know, I kind of have a habit of bringing people from the 5-MeO-DMT world onto the podcast to share about their story, share about how they view working with the medicine, what their practices are, what their experiences are. So that's kind of hoping where we'll be going today, as well as all your other offerings. So let's start with the usual place of, like, I always say, everybody's got a story for how they got into this world. And so now here's your opportunity for you to share your story with us. And you are welcome to be as personal or as general as you want. Sometimes when people get kind of generalized, like, well, tell me more about that. But it's up to you, like, what level you want to reveal of your own personal life and history.
I love it. Okay. Yeah. This is so perfect because my girlfriend has encouraged me to share my story. And so I just recently, maybe 2 months ago, published my story as far as what led me into the healing world on my website, which, you know, I think it's important to share that at this point. It's very vulnerable because it's just raw, and it can be challenging for people to read, and I'll share it here. But it's the truth of what pulled me here, right? Yeah. And so part of me, I'm fine with just openness and sharing things publicly. But this is a whole different layer, because then it's just, you know, there's a piece of thinking people may think, well, that's too much. You shouldn't be sharing, you know, those kind of layers of, well, this is out for the world to see. And yet I think it's important for us to be vulnerable, especially men nowadays. To me, that's what real strength is, especially as a man, to really have that and to be comfortable with that vulnerability. That's what ultimately creates intimacy in all of our relations. So with all that being said, I started very organically. I don't even remember exactly what it was, but I was just compelled to find out about magic mushrooms about a decade ago, maybe a little more, 11 years ago. And somehow I came across them, and I had a friend who connected me with them, and I didn't have any connections to any of this. So the only way I was able to actually get them was through a guy he knew who dealt like cocaine. And so I'm like, wait, I'm getting this like magic mushroom to have like an entheogenic experience from essentially a drug dealer. Okay. So I did. And they were actually really tasty. They tasted like buttered popcorn for some reason. But I did my research and just like did this container. Like I grabbed a stick. We ended up in Joshua Tree, me and a few other friends, and I grabbed a stick and drew like a circle around the whole perimeter we were going to be in, and put some rocks around and intentions, and just kind of did a little prayer to the land, and, you know, just wanted to kind of like set some kind of container space. I didn't know what I was doing, but that was the start of me working with entheogens. And then from there, I just saw how that could help me heal, because I had been doing traditional psychotherapy. I had done that for years, and that helped to a point, but it stopped because it was all mental. And it was great because it helped me understand it logically. However, it wasn't helping get to the much deeper layers of my soul and my heart. And although I could feel things around what I'm getting and the logicality of things and why they happened, it certainly didn't help heal those things. So once I did the mushrooms, I was like, wow, this taps into that vein, because there's like this wonderful connection between the heart and the mind in that space, right? So what ultimately led me into all this work was I had met a friend and was just sharing with him very nonchalantly some of my traumas. And the way I was talking about them, he said, well, you are really connected from those. You could really benefit from some therapy. And so anyway, he ended up writing me this really heartfelt letter to point some things out. And so I took him up on that. And that's when I jumped into therapy and realized, okay, there's right. I had just numbed myself off to the world and cut off like this whole emotional body, and was just really living from my head in a very controlled environment in what I could perceive. And so ultimately I ended up opening these things up and starting to feel much more than I had ever felt before, and wanted to heal these traumas, and especially my root traumas. And so ended up coming across ayahuasca, and that is what changed my whole life big time. Like that one very first weekend completely shifted my perception of my limitations, my perception of my being, like on every level. I totally saw, like, beyond the mind and the heart, like every level of my being, all these different layers, and feeling so much more than I'd ever felt before. I had this huge, what they would call a Kundalini awakening, where I just had this surge of energy flowing through me. And so with that, it just really opened things up way more than I ever even thought was possible.
All right, so if Shuan, if I could just interrupt you for just a moment, I want you to keep telling the story, but there's just a couple things that you mentioned. Sorry, and I'm shuffling papers here because I want to be able to take notes. Just a couple things that I think are really worth kind of highlighting. And one is that I like that you've already made this distinction between the therapy that you had been receiving was mostly mental. And, there's kind of the recategorization and the shuffling through our thoughts and our patterns. But as that doesn't really get to the root. And I love that you mentioned that working with mushrooms and then with ayahuasca, it got you in touch with feeling. It got you in touch with heart. And this is a point that I've kind of been harping on a little bit recently, where we had this word psychedelic, which means mind manifesting. And I think that in a lot of the psychedelic world, sort of the mental aspect of it is sort of preloaded in a sense, where people say, well, I want to get insights, I want to get downloads, I want to have mental breakthroughs. But what you're pointing towards is it opens you up to feeling more, and even going beyond, as you say, the heart and the mind is just the direct energy of being, like you're describing this energy rushing through you. And so this is a place where I'm like trying to redirect people. It's like, yeah, it's actually this somatic, embodied, energetic experience. And it's not just about the mind. It's about these deeper currents and these deeper energies. And so I just wanted to highlight that, and also highlight the fact that it's beautiful that you had a friend who is willing to, in a loving and compassionate way, kind of call you out a little bit and say, right. and hearing you discuss this, I can hear you in your mind, and where is that feeling? And I think that it's so important to have people in our lives that we can connect with who are willing to share a hard truth with us.
Right. So,
and it's so rare because, everybody is so afraid of hurting other people's feelings or saying the wrong thing. But sometimes we do need people to step forward and say, hey, Shuan, with all love and respect, man, you're stuck in your mind, and this is not going to do it for you. And so it's just so beautiful that you had that gift of a friend who is willing to maybe make you upset, or maybe, hurt your feelings by pointing out this disconnection, which opened the pathway for you to find this greater openness and vulnerability in yourself. And so I just want to applaud your friend and applaud you for having a friend like that.
Yeah, thanks. And part of how he shared with me is actually really informed and helped me refine the way that I share things with people, because the way he said it wasn't even putting me on the defensive in any way, shape, or form. It was so just heart-centered and compassionate and not pushy in any way, shape, or form. Just completely sharing from this place of, I love you, and this is purely coming from that. So, if you want to take a look at this, I'm here to support you. So I think that that's really important too, because nobody wants to necessarily be told you're doing this wrong.
Yeah.
That can be helpful, perhaps, depending on the situation, but like calling someone out directly doesn't generally work in our day and age, because we can be really sensitive, right? And ultimately, I think we all have some sensitivity that needs to be considered in these situations.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for letting me interrupt. Let's return to your ayahuasca experience. And actually, just quickly, so it sounds like that very first mushroom experience, that was inspired by this desire to reach a new level of connection with yourself.
Totally.
So kind of entered into it more from a transformative and therapeutic approach. I mean, some people like, yeah, I took mushrooms, went to parties, went to Joshua Tree and just hiked and had a great time. But it sounds like the motivation was this desire to get in touch with these deeper levels of yourself.
Yeah. And actually realizing now that there was also this layer to get in deeper touch with others, because I'd always felt there was this kind of wall between me and the world, and even me and my friends. And it was so perfect because I had some trusted friends there, and it totally pulled these walls away where I just felt this layer of intimacy that it was so new and yet exciting. And I wasn't scared of it. I was like, oh, this is great. Because it was, it was like a safe space that we crafted together. So yeah, really, really beautiful. And so then with ayahuasca, that is what really pulled me into the entheogenic world of honoring what is going on in the energetic space and trusting what is popping up in this feeling that we have this incredible capacity in our bodies to know what's going on and ultimately to honor that. And so I got into this place of complete and full surrender, and the medicines were guiding me to do all these things, and I didn't question them. I just trusted, and they guided me to do these things. And I know that they totally rewired me in so many ways and worked through this, what I thought was like my first sexual trauma, and worked through some of that in a very unique way. And actually, I believe we got to the root of it. And it was in such a unique way that I was like, wait, is this really okay? But it got to this beautiful place where I was like, okay, cool. And I knew that there was more, even though that was a really powerful weekend. I did 2 nights and totally shifted so many things. And I had downloads from that, not just mental, but like into my being, like when I was sleeping, and then into my heart, just these little like nuggets of like self-love, and layers of practicing self-care just started to kind of unwind. And the long story short of the ayahuasca is that one of the next times I sat with ayahuasca, well, before that, we'll get to the first time I did 5-MeO DMT was actually after that. So that was my first weekend. And then maybe like 7 to 9 months later, I was gifted this 5-MeO DMT experience. I was curious and I was interested. And I honestly didn't really know like what depths I would be going to.
Yeah.
That you kind of launched out of your body. And I was like, okay, that sounds great. But I had no clue. I mean, you can't really describe that to someone anyway, to an extent, from where I was at. So I did that. And that was life-changing as well. So I had the beautiful ego death experience and had some soul song activation, connected with my light family, like my astral family out in the ethers, and really purged some incredible energies out of my being. It was almost like ayahuasca, like I had these purges happen, but nothing really came out physically. But in my world, I saw an incredible amount of energy like release from me, all these colors and just energies like a flood.
Yeah.
And then when I came back into the world, that rebirth that, you and I are very aware of, it was just so much. I experienced so much love, this thread of all creation underlying this beautiful fabric of love. And it just was so much. Every time I've done 5-MeO, it's been that where I've had to like close my eyes and just like cry it out to integrate it into my body, into my being. Like the mind was just trying to wrap itself around, wait, what? And then my heart was like, I get it. Oh God, yes. So it was like, especially with the people that were there, and even my dog was there, and I was just feeling and seeing all of that through this lens of love and integrated that. And that took like 9 months. And same thing with ayahuasca. I had these beautiful downloads in my sleep sometimes, in my waking life, these little jewels of wisdom. And that is, I believe, what those 2 experiences led me into my next ayahuasca journey, where I had been having these physical challenges when I moved to LA. I'd had these rectal spasms, and they had made no sense. I went to the doctor, and they checked me out. They said, "Oh yeah, you're great. You're very healthy. All these things are, there doesn't make any sense what's going on. So you're good. You're healthy. No problems." Yeah. And so there was no science to what was going on with me. And I had them they would wake me up in the middle of the night, and they were debilitating. Like I couldn't walk. I felt like I was going to pass out, like I was going to die. There was so much fear, and I didn't understand what it was. So much fear came up from these incredibly intense rectal spasms. And I ended up like finding this term that, of course, they created called proctalgia fugax, which is just like, let's make up a thing so we can diagnose this. We have no cure. We have no clue what it is, but we'll make up a thing to call it.
Right. Put a name on it. There you go.
Proctal. I'm like, okay, proctal, hilarious. So anyway, I ended up having this. And anytime I would wake up in the middle of the night, it was like I was dreaming blackness, which I always dream vivid. But when I would wake up from those, it was always blackness I would wake up from. And so the night before the ayahuasca ceremony, I had this dream. I'm walking down this hallway, and it's school time, and I'm 6 years old. So, it's like first grade-ish, and it's really bright out, and there's children walking down, and it's really like it's daytime, and the lights are really bright in the hallways, and I'm walking towards the end to go walk out the door outside. And then as I go there, this door opens up, and a very familiar person from my childhood grabs me, pulls me in this closet, and shuts the door. And then I wake up, and then I have those spasms, and I'm having the insight for the first time ever. Oh, wow. Is this what that's about?
Yeah.
Okay. So we go to the ayahuasca ceremony, and it was one of the very few times I've actually been able to sit with a female shaman. And she said, "Let's talk about your childhood." I was like, "Oh, that's interesting you say that. So this is my dream." She said, "That's what you're working on. There you go." So I realized in that ceremony just what I could at the time, that there was someone from my childhood that I had no clue had totally sexually assaulted me. I was aware of like every other level, physical and verbal abuse, mental, all that stuff I was aware of, but the sexual, I had no clue that happened. And that was when I was 6 years old. That happened daily for 7 months. And it was completely blacked out from my reality, but it was stuck in my body. It was stored in my body. And so interesting that I had symptoms. I've had, problems down in that area in my late teens and even into my early 20s. And then they just disappeared. And then when I moved to LA, and what they call your Saturn returns, when you get close to 30, you kind of have this like big growth period in your life as a being, as a human, right? So that was when it started again. And so I was able to start working through those energies, to really start to cleanse some of those energies. And to kind of bring it full circle, it took years. I was able to fully see all that happened in that space, just like flashes. Not that I had to experience what happened because it was stuck in my body, but it took years to energetically clean all of that out and to really get to the root of it, to heal it. So one of my favorite medicines for sure is ayahuasca. Absolutely, for sure. And that's part of, I believe, why I serve her. I didn't expect to be serving her because I have so much reverence and love. And I know that before I thought I would ever do it, I know that you have to learn the Icaros. That's incredibly important. And, you have to learn from the indigenous. So I did not expect to be doing that. But then the times that I received 5-MeO, the last time, second to last time, the last 2 times were very close. But the second time, it was that same experience and because I had done a good amount of entheogenic work, especially with ayahuasca, I did 5-MeO. And when I came into my body, it was finally this time where I could accept this vulnerability in the world and embrace that it's okay to feel this with everyone in the world, not just the people that I know, but people out in the world, which is not an easy task to go and integrate, right? because in the medicine, when you're coming out, you're like, oh my God, yes, it's so much love. I can feel it. It's just like overwhelming in a beautiful way. And so it gave me that permission to own all of that within me and then also without. And that became my integration, to really practice that with everyone in my life, even the people that I don't know. And it's practice to me.
Yeah. And then, even with the people you don't necessarily like that you do know, right?
Because
that's, it's like way back in my process, this would be in early 2009. No, excuse me, early 2008. And it was shortly after my first introduction to 5-MeO. It was actually my second session with 5-MeO. And I was given some MDMA by a friend. And as that came on, just what literally started coming through me. I was lying down on this bed, like some amethyst crystal massage bed, something like that. And was listening to binaural beats on these headphones, but I'm lying there, my hands shot up into the air and just started vibrating like this, which I'm showing you, that the audience can't see this because they're just listening, but like these little butterfly wings just going and going and going. And then what verbally started coming through was this command of love all equally without any exception. And it repeated and repeated, and it got stronger and stronger. I mean, just the energy was just going up and up and up. But it's kind of exactly what you're talking about, that there is this, when we recognize the true nature of being, that everything is actually this energy of love, even from our personal perspective of like, yeah, that sucked, or I didn't like that. But it's all woven in the fabric of love, that it actually does require us, if we're going to live in resonance with that there is this command, in a sense, to love everyone. And that it is a very open and vulnerable place. And it's a little bit scary from the human perspective, because it also means, loving the things that we don't necessarily like, but we can still not like them. But there is this sense of love. I mean, it's kind of paradoxical. So it's hard for the human mind to wrap itself around, like, well, how do I do that? But It sounds like you got the message through this process of personal transformation. Shuan, something I'm curious of is what were you doing in your exterior life at this point? Because at this point you're a medicine server, you're working in this realm, but I'm curious what it was that you were doing as you were kind of going through this transition, going through this healing, and then ultimately brought you into working in the healing space. But what were you doing during this time period?
Well, the funny thing is, once you get to a certain point, you can see the whole picture so clearly, which is part of what I love about not being judgmental about what's happening now. Like, this shouldn't be happening, right? No, this is supposed to happen, because we can't see the full picture from here and now, right?
Yeah.
So part of this, like, whole, again, Saturn returns thing was I was living in Florida and moved. I sold my house. I have a daughter, and I ended up giving custody to her mom, which was a really difficult choice for me. And so it was this whole huge upheaval in my life. And I thought I was coming to LA to be an actor. Mm. And I did pursue that for a long time. And ultimately, I got into personal training. I did some extra work for a little while, but then I got into personal training. So that's what I was like doing, which, I loved helping people and working with people in that way. And it was helping like improve them. Right. And I was a coach. And so the beautiful thing that I see now with all of this was that me, through the aspects of acting and the stuff I was gravitating towards, was ultimately about being comfortable in your own skin, right? Because I believed that actors that were the best really were comfortable in their own skin. They knew themselves well. They knew how to play their like notes as a being. And so I had some incredible acting coaches, one in particular who guided me into like doing energy work and said, ayahuasca would be great for you. I thought it was a kind of mushroom that I couldn't find. So, I see the whole picture as to, I was actually drawn out here to grow and to evolve into like a healed person, and to not only just become healed, but also to share this healing with others.
I'm curious, do you still have any desires to act? Is there any interest there?
No, I mean, if somebody offered me some like perfect fit, I would probably do that. But at this point, no, I'm definitely not interested in like seeking it or going after it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just curious. Um, so it sounds like through the healing work that, as you've described, you were really able to tap into those residual energies that were stored in the body, right? And so this is where we're talking about. This is the difference between talk therapy, where we can talk about it and we can process our thoughts, but it doesn't get to the experience of releasing the stuck energies that, even if we don't consciously recall, it's still there in the body. And this is one of these things that I always like to say, yeah, the only way out is through. And sometimes it's very messy and it's challenging, like you're describing these purgings, these energetic purgings that are happening on the 5-MeO with all these colors flooding out of you, that it's such a visceral process. And it can be intimidating. Think like, oh God, do I've got to go through that? Yet it feels cathartic, doesn't it? Right? You go through it, it's like, oh my God, it's like I did it. I made it through and I feel clean now.
Right. I've loved every experience in all of my medicine work, all of my entheogenic experiences. I've really enjoyed and relished the whole process, because to me it's really kind of pleasurable, but it's the experience of releasing. Even when it's like purging in my very first ayahuasca experience, I could feel all the energies, right? These stuck things going from certain parts of my body into my stomach and then purging them out. And then I felt so much better, right?
I know.
In ayahuasca, they call it getting well, which is so true.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for anyone who hasn't been through it, there's usually sort of a very visceral sense of like, oh God, I don't want to have to do something like that. Like, can my healing be like clean? But I love the enthusiasm with which you speak of it, that it's actually, it's messy and it's dramatic, but and even though the purging often can be like, oh God, like the whole universe is turning inside out through me, like, I don't know if I can do this, but then you do it and it's like, oh my God, I feel so much better. And for me, something that becomes very clear at that point is how much energy we actually expend suppressing all of that and then trying to maintain the facade around it, like, well, no, that stuff's not there, right? To create that artificial sense of self. And then when we get to the other side of it, it frees up so much more energy within our being. It's like, oh, I'm not guarding that anymore. I'm not suppressing that anymore. I'm not carrying that around. So it's so great. It's like I had this one woman who watched one of my videos and she sent me a message like, I would just love to shit and piss and vomit it all out. Oh my God, that's what I want for myself. It's like, yeah, good.
Oh, I get it. Yeah. And it's funny because with me in my journey, I realized in time, like months and months later, that all of a sudden my body was so much lighter and so much more malleable and easy to move and even more flexible, because I was literally squeezing my muscles. There was always tension, and even in my organs, and I didn't even know how I was doing that. And yet months and months later, after like a certain level of work was done, I was like, oh my God, my body is totally different. And it functions totally different, because you don't know when you're in that space, when you're just retaining all those things. And so all that energy was just being sucked and focused in there. And that's part of what was just keeping me on this little inner prison where I was just in control, right? Which, not really, I was in control, but in my brain I was, right? I thought I was, and I was safe, but so untrue. I was so unsafe and got so exploited in that little fear bubble.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. Being vulnerable and sharing these details of your experience. And, I want to agree with your girlfriend that I think that it's valuable in this world of medicine healing and working with all of these very powerful tools that, sometimes I don't think we have a lot of this, but it's certainly out there of people like, I'm the guru. I've got all the answers. My life is perfect. Give me your money and you can be like me, but I think everybody does have a healing story or a transformative story or what brought them into it. And that we've all got, dark stuff that we've had to process through. And I think that, some people, for example, they might go to your website and it's like, oh, like I didn't want to hear this about this guy. But what I think that it ultimately allows is for people who really would benefit from working with you to be able to see like, okay, well, he's a human being too. Here's what he has to share. He's being vulnerable, and that gives them confidence that they can come and be vulnerable with you. And I've always tried to use that as a guiding principle for myself of just like transparency. I want to be transparent about who I am and what my experience is. And then you find the right people, I think, rather than someone with the false image of like, oh, Shuan, the perfect being, I want to work with him, versus Shuan, the human being, he's in it with us, So I think it's of great value, and yeah, it might turn some people off, but ultimately it helps the right people find you, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Part of what motivated me to do that was some of my dear friends and even just people's websites that I've seen, they're all very similar as to just a cursory glance of, I've been to school, I've lived some life, I can help you. Yeah. Which is great and lovely that that's the offering, right? But it's very cursory. It's relatively superficial. And so I believe we're in this space now where we really need connection, and people are seeking connection. And it's easy in our virtual digital world to lose touch with that. So this is where I was really motivated to lean into that in the virtual world to help encourage that all around.
Yeah. So to return to your story, it sounds like then you applied yourself to learning how to serve ayahuasca and learn the Icaros. Did you do an apprenticeship, or how did that come about?
Yeah, it's really pretty magical, the whole experience for me with learning it, because I went to the jungle within a year of first sitting with ayahuasca and spent, a month and a half there. And that was a deep dive. That was definitely life-changing. I went very deep in the jungle to the Huniquin tribe, where it's a 4-day boat ride there on this little, like 6-foot wide, essentially kind of like a pontoon boat. And 4 days, so you have to sleep, at people's homes that you don't know, but they're really gracious in hosting you, and then it takes 3 days by boat to get out. And then, so it's this whole journey just to get there.
Yeah.
And I was trained. I didn't realize it. It's like I was Miyagi'd. It's like I was just learning these ways from the shaman I had sat with. He's now a dear friend, and he was teaching me how to serve medicines like hape and other medicines I was just learning, and the ways of holding space and the ways of healing, and especially with sitting with so much medicine in such a short period of time, I was really integrating it very well and very quickly. And just really being able to root into the land was helpful for me as well. Part of what helped in the beginning of that journey was I wasn't getting any sleep. So within 3 nights, I maybe got 5 hours of sleep total. And so I got to this place where I was hawking up green stuff, right? And I'm like, oh, no. So the third night, Lima had won a soccer game, and everyone's honking on their horns really loud throughout the night, every 15 minutes. And I'm like, really? I just want some sleep. And so I realized at that point, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like in such like resistance, I'm fighting what is. And so that was my biggest lesson that helped the entire time there. I said, okay, so I need to just surrender to anything and everything that pops up, surrender. And that has aided me so well. And that has carried through in all of my work since then, surrender. Because when you think it's supposed to be a certain way, or you want it to be a certain way, that's not how it's supposed to be, clearly. So yeah, that was a really huge shift in my path. And then I ended up holding space and just very organically holding space for friends, like in mushroom ceremonies. And that evolved into holding like ceremonies with mushrooms. And then at a point, I had been to the jungle and gained some wisdom from dieting one of the master plants there, and had done 5-MeO again, and really was called to serve that medicine. So I went and trained in Florida with a gentleman, and we ended up serving a lot of people in a pretty short amount of time. At a point, we had 7 people in the medicine at once, which at this point I would never do, but it was a very interesting learning experience. Very interesting. So I learned a lot from that. And then it evolved of me just kind of like serving microdoses to myself or to friends, and just slowly evolved into me serving people. Like when people were ready, when I was ready, then people came in. And I had already been learning these containers for years and years. So by the time I actually served someone for a full journey, it was incredible. And I had this beautiful humility around it for them and their process, and was just very at peace with them going through their process with minimal input. As I see these containers, as you know, are very, very delicate and need to be handled with such reverence and care, and also just honoring what is and what needs to take place and allowing them the space for that to be. And I didn't think that I would be serving ayahuasca until I had this ceremony. And then I just got this really loud calling to go. I heard a literal feminine voice really strongly call me to the jungle, and I wasn't planning on going. So I honored it. And I had been invited repeatedly from a friend. She was going, and I was like, no, I'm supposed to go to India. So it was just too close to it. But then when I heard that voice, I was like, I don't know who that is, but do what that voice says. And then my very first ayahuasca experience in the jungle said, you're supposed to be serving ayahuasca. And then I had a choice. They said I could follow the path that I was going to, with initiating with this guru that I had been honoring and a devotee of for 3.5 years, or it said you can follow this path. You must focus on one. And so I chose the plants and fully surrendered my life to them and to learning their ways. And so this was all last year. I ended up I'd done several other plant dietas before that, but then I did 5 master plant dietas last year to finish my training, which all in all, it's not a whole lot in respects to other shaman. Sometimes it takes 12 years to become a shaman of these medicines. But there was this incredible like inertia apparently from my past lives, and from just even like the organic training that I've had in this life, where they've given me this wisdom and this ability to serve the medicine, and this blessing of my Shipibo name, which is such an honor, because that's not a common thing. Yeah, I mean, you may get a Shipibo name if you're there for long enough and working with the plants, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're ready or able to serve the medicine. So yeah, it was a very unexpected and organic thing of me learning all of these Icaros last year and giving some from the plants, and just really going through this rigorous training in a really short amount of time. But I was so committed to the plants. That was my focus. I was just in isolation, working with them day in, day out for every day I was there last year. And then, yeah, it shifted to me being this ayahuasca shaman, very unexpectedly, but with incredible reverence for this role that I've been blessed with.
Yeah. So then in coming back to the States, like I've mentioned it before, we've got your website here, divineguidance.me. Is this the point that you put the website together and started offering more at like the public level, or when was that transition?
No, the website, interestingly, was developed a year before that. Yeah. And so then last year I was kind of out of the country for most of the year. And yeah, and then it shifted, and then I updated it this year to be more of a reflection of where I'm at and what I'm offering at this point. And yeah, I've always wanted to do ceremony, to really just offer that. I just didn't know that it was going to be with ayahuasca.
Yeah.
And mushrooms.
Well, I'd love to hear more at this point, how you do go about facilitating and serving and offering ceremony with these different medicines. We could start with whichever one you'd like to start with, but I'd always like to know, this is where I like to get into specifics of like, how many people do you work with at a time? When do you sing the Icaros? Like, what's the process? I'm always interested in the process, and what is the setup? How do you interact with people in that space? How do you bring them in? What goes on? So I'm just very curious to hear about all those.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. So the interesting thing is with my mushroom containers, they've shifted immensely. I used to play recorded Icaros from Maria Sabina.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you know her work.
Yeah.
And they're not pretty. They're not something one aspires to just listen to like any day of the week. They can be really like harsh and kind of like forceful and aggressive. So I never wanted to learn them. And then with my new relationship with these plants, they've guided me to sing the Icaros that I know because they're present and they come from the plants and they actually work better in this space and in this time with these containers, especially since I'm holding them because my plants are ultimately working through with the mushrooms and with all the plants that I work with. And so my mushroom containers are similar to the ayahuasca containers in the sense of like the overall structure, like protection structure of it, and then the Icaros. The Icaros are a lot more simple generally with the mushroom containers, mushroom ceremonies, because there may not be as many, and it's a very different energetic with mushrooms compared to ayahuasca. So yeah, those generally there's a transition towards the end where it can get light and really fun, and maybe there's a little space for dance and things like that. Sometimes that happens with ayahuasca, but generally it's much more of a deep dive when we kind of stay there for a bit. And maybe this night, then we can transition to that. But in the last weekend I held, it was really beautiful. We had some great moments of incredible laughter both nights, which I think is fantastic. And it's just very organic how those things happen. So the containers for both overall are very similar. I'll serve the medicines, and it's very specific, like per person. I'll just tune into each person and serve them what is right, what is being guided to serve them, the amount. And so then after that, we all get into a space, and this is in the Shipibo tradition, which I love and adore at this point, which was a process with me. When I first sat with that tradition in ayahuasca, I did not resonate with it. I didn't love it. And then last year, it was just the right teacher. I found this teacher. I was just like, oh, yes, wow. And the land that I was on and the plants, and it was just like sunk in. So now this is the way that I carry the Shipibo tradition. So after we drink the medicine, we get into a meditative space for maybe 30 minutes where everyone's just ideally seated upright and tuning into their hearts, to their bodies. And as the medicine is coming in, the effects, then tuning into that as well. So it can be a really nice way to greet and meet the medicine and then to begin to work with it from that soft space of surrender. And then once I'm feeling the energy of the container of everyone there start to experience the medicine, then I'll begin singing the Icaros. And there are several that are important in the beginning to set up certain protections and call in certain allies and beings. And then there are others that come later on that are for healing and specific healing, maybe to specific people. But generally, there's layers of that with everyone. So a lot of them more later on are for healing overall. Like that's the general healing. And then sometimes there's entities. And I've worked a lot with entity removal this year with people, which I think is getting more and more important and more needed because people don't necessarily know if they have entities. Even if they've been in this world for a little while, it can be challenging because we'll identify them as part of us. And they can come in, like in our childhood, it could have happened with me. I was in a protected space, thankfully, where that didn't happen. But it can come in from being in a traumatic space where your energy just gets so wide open, you're vulnerable, and then this entity comes in and attaches. And so we can identify with it. And especially if there's an addiction entity, especially something strong like meth, then there's very likely an entity involved in that situation that ideally needs to be removed for you to heal. And so that has been a very important space this past year for me to work with people in to extricate these entities so that they can be whole again. And so that's a whole different process. And that's definitely important to be using the Icaros and even other medicines and modalities. And so my containers, once the Icaros are being sung, it's very fluid. There's a very feminine overall dynamic of, as you know, it's similar to the 5-MeO space of just honoring what the energy is and how that needs to be worked with for the highest good of all, for helping people work through whatever they're working through, to heal specific things. And there might be medicines that are called for to help them shift through that, or to transmute certain things, or to purge certain things out. The thing about purging, and in the West, we're so turned off from purging generally because we're like, oh, I'm throwing up. I don't want to vomit, and we call it purging because you're actually clearing, you're cleaning, you're cleansing. And in the shamanic ways, it's one of the deepest and most profound ways to get things out of your being, out of your, not just your body, but out of your being, like mental, emotional stuff, energetically. It's such a powerful way to release it. And there's a permission with the body of like, okay, yes, we're removing this, and I consent. So it's important in a way. And you may not have to purge that way. There's also the bottom end purges, and there's other ways of moving the energy. So it's just really this beautiful fluid container where there's, you're kind of in this energetic, beautiful, spiritual, like soup of what's going on and what needs to be handled to facilitate the highest good, the highest healing of each person there. And then it's just very individualized. And yet at the same time, it's also like, if I was working on you one-on-one, it's like, maybe we're working on one specific thing for you, but there's fractals of it into the others in the container, right? And then of course, it's also helping me in certain ways in all of my relations, right? So that's part of why I love this work, because I see it as the Maharishi effect of, we heal one, we heal all on some level, right? It's not that if we heal this one thing in you or me, that it heals that in everyone else, but it does have these energetic effects, and it gives us permission for people to be able to see that space and perhaps hold that in their own being and receive that same level of healing.
Yeah, that these boundaries really open up within this space, especially when there's any kind of group work going on. And, sometimes you get somebody across the room and they're purging, and the person over there is like, oh, I'm feeling so much better. And then that person over there is crying, and then so it starts this person over here crying. And you can really feel how all of this is connected. That we live in these relatively isolated little body bubbles, but we're not isolated. That's the reality, is that we actually are all connected. And I know a lot of people say, well, I want to be more connected to other people, but the reality is we are all connected. It all is one thing interacting with itself, and we are just different nodes of expression of this universal nature. And so I think that's one of the most interesting things about doing medicine work, is when these exchanges do happen between the different nodes and how these reflections show up. Like you say, that these fractal iterations, that it might not be the full issue that this one person is having that might relate to me, but there's always aspects of it. Like once we really open ourselves, that we see that all human experience is a reflection of our own experience, or all experience, not just human experience, but we are all reflections of each other, that we all have in different degrees. It's amplified differently in different people, but we all have the same quote unquote issues ultimately, because we are all this self-aware ego that's like, who the fuck am I? What's going on? And, creating our answers to that. But we are underneath that, to go back to some points we were making before, that we are all just this universal consciousness, this energy of love that's like, it's just interacting with itself. So these are all natural parts of the process. And I think for most people who work in the medicine space, that this is all well understood. But for people who don't really understand, they're outside that world, it's like, it's hard to make sense of this level of connectivity that ultimately gets revealed within these spaces. So in these ayahuasca sessions, it sounds like you're mostly doing group work with people, which is, fairly standard for ayahuasca. Do you have like a limit of how many people you like to serve at a time, or do you have an ideal number? Like what's most manageable?
No, it's funny. My containers have been relatively intimate, generally between 3 to 10 people that I'm working with to heal. And then I have at least one helper. I always love the balance of the feminine masculine. So I'm blessed with having a fantastic like feminine counterpart that works with me in Asheville and in Los Angeles. And so I love that. And that's important for multiple reasons, but I just love the energetic balance of it. And so, yeah, my ideal is this past weekend, I was able to serve, we had 14 people total, which was fantastic. So, once we get to like 25 people, 30 people, that's probably about the max number that I would be comfortable with, just because it gets logistically challenging more than anything. And I really want everyone to feel like they're in a safe space with this, so it's not just this big spiritual party.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but I haven't hosted that many people thus far.
Yeah. The biggest I was ever in, this is many years ago now, but at the local Santo Daime church, I was at one of their works, and they had one of their big people came from Brazil. I forget who it was, but I think there were 250 people attending for that work. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of energies moving around.
That is.
Yeah. Most often when I was going, it was maybe 50 people. 30 to 50 people, I think, was probably more common. But still, it's a lot of people. It's a lot of different energies to be opening up all in the same space.
Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about how you like to work with 5MEO and how you like to serve and facilitate sort of, again, I'm very interested in sort of the walkthrough. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with this book of mine, the Facilitating 5MEO book, where I invited people who work with 5MEO kind of all around the world to sort of submit, like, how do you work with it? How do you understand it? What do you like to do with it? And so this is an anthology of mine that I put together, but I'm kind of imagining you as like, well, if you were part of the anthology, what would you want to say about how you work with it and kind of what your structure is?
Yeah. Yeah, it's similar to, all of my, like, even when I do a hape ceremony, which is, relatively brief, 20-minute-ish ceremony, or like an ambil ceremony, which is a mapacha, tobacco paste. It's all the same thing. There's always a reverential container. So with 5MEO, I just served a couple days ago someone, and there's always a cleansing of the energetic space and the person and myself. And I'll do that generally with mapacho, which is tobacco from the jungle, pure tobacco from the jungle, and then maybe palo santo or sage, depending on what's available and what is called for. So there's definitely a part of that for me that I tune in with. And sometimes it'll be copal and frankincense, but ultimately it just depends. So the energetic clearing, cleansing, we call it smudging, and also just setting the container space of where we're going to be so that everything is comfortable, making sure, especially for 5MEO, that there's a nice cushy area that we can round in and navigate together. Water's nearby, there's a bucket nearby, toilet paper, everything that we might potentially need is close by. And then I don't like jumping into the mental space before that. So people ask, which she did, what should I expect?
Yeah.
Expect nothing. Let go of all of that. Just surrender any thoughts, any expectations, any outcomes. Let's completely detach, because that's the place where you really, truly want to be fully in surrender. Not at all in your head when you're receiving the medicine.
Yeah.
And so I like to do a little energetic cleanse too, physically, energetically with the body. So with her, I served a medicine called ambil, which is a tobacco paste. So it's just pure tobacco from the jungle. They boil it for about 24 hours with love and prayer. And it's pure, just pure tobacco, but it's fantastic for clearing the energy. It's really good for, like, even Western medicine is catching up and showing that it's really good for the brain, for anxiety and depression, and for our immune system, for our memory. It's got so many benefits to it. And so it's palpable, the energetic feel of the shift. It's kind of relaxing.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, cool. You just feel like at peace. And so I had her do that and tune into whether it's to swallow it or to spit it out. So it's a bit fiery. And if you swallow it, it can encourage a little more fire inside, which some people need, or maybe for the journey you need. So she swallowed it. And I was like, great, cool. She totally tuned in. And then I prepared the medicine and ended up serving her. And it was beautiful because this is not typical unless they've done combo first, but she purged. She had 2 waves of purge, and it was, as you know, it was deep, like beautiful. Like these colors came out. Of course, the umbil came out, but like this color, like associated with that, came out of her, and there's multiple layers of deep purge. So I had served her the medicine twice, and that was the first start of it. Was these like deep, not fully embodied like purges, but like mental purges. And then we got to a point where, so these are totally organic and fluid containers, as you know, and that's how I honor them too. And then we needed a little talk therapy because I felt there was a block. And so we talked about that for a little bit, and not in the sense of me being a therapist or her therapist, but what is at the root of this? What are you feeling right now? What is going on right now that is your sticking point that you're hitting? And so we brought that up and energized it. And then I brought her back to a place where I wanted her to root into what was her most precious memory of receiving love as a child, because that's ultimately what it had to do with. It was big layer of that. So I was like, what was your, and just to kind of help her get her motor going, I shared mine. And so she, as soon as I was finished sharing mine, she's like, okay, here's mine. Yeah. And it was lovely. And I said, great, root into that. Keep that really. And I could see it on her face and her eyes and her body. And so she rooted into that. And then I served her the 3rd time. And that's usually the maximum amount I will serve anyone. For whatever reasons, that's generally like the best number, max. And so the 3rd time she went fully in, and it was so beautiful, like that full surrender, you know, the body in that space, just doing what it needs to do. Yeah. And just going through. And it was really quite graceful and beautiful to see. And I always just navigate with it with as little input as possible, so that I'm not influencing them in any way, shape, or form. And sometimes if a loving word like surrender or something like that is needed or called for, then I will share those things if they get into a challenging space. But generally, I do my best to not touch or not say anything unless that is truly needed and going to serve them. And so, yeah, her process was very simple and graceful in that way. And so fun to see, you know, when they come back and they're like slowly coming back into their body and being reborn and kind of coming back in to this world. And you can see it's like through these new eyes. Yeah. And so I always just give the space for that to just sit there and for them to be the first one to say anything or do anything, because it's such a raw place to be. And I believe it really needs to be honored with love and just pure compassion and holding space. And one thing that I don't like that I know some facilitators do, which I think is really not a good thing, is to not look at people, not make eye contact for people. I know of a few people in particular that do that. And to me, that is one of the most important things that I see people seeking when they sit with me in this space. They're looking for that soul connection, for that resonance, for that like assurance of like, wait, am I alone? Or like, what is this? And they can see it through you. I mean, if you have walls up, sure, that may not be in one regard what they're looking for. However, at the same time, they're looking for connection and they're needing it. And so I'm always there for that. And it's so beautiful. Just the simplicity of really seeing them, really receiving them, and allowing them to be seen and received as well. I just see how powerfully and beautifully it affects them and helps them come back in and just feel safe.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really glad that you mentioned that, Shuan, because this is an issue that's been around in the 5MEO community for a while now. And I have always been exactly with what you're describing right here. Like back when I was facilitating, I would always position myself right at the foot of the space of where the person was having their experience. And I would tell them, like, even if they brought other people with them, I would always say, if you need to connect with somebody, if you need to make eye contact, I am right here. And if you want to play the stare game, I'm right here. And if you need to connect, I'm right here. And that I want you to look at me, and I'm comfortable with that. And some people in the 5MEO space, they say, well, they use this weird language of, well, there's the imprinting that happens, and so you don't want to make eye contact it's like they're treating people as like ducks, or, because ducks do that, right? Like they make eye contact with their mom and then beep, 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 and then they follow their mom around, and that's the imprinting. And I just think it's a completely misguided reading of what's taking place within the space. And that I think ultimately, if somebody is facilitating and they're uncomfortable with people looking them in the eye, I would encourage that facilitator to maybe take a hard look at yourself in the mirror, look yourself in the eye, because if you think there's something quote unquote wrong or dangerous with that, like, you are bypassing one of the most fundamental aspects of human connection.
Totally.
And it's so important, and for the facilitator to be available for that, and in a way that I think other people in the space ultimately, they don't need to be available for that. In other words, when they're coming back into their sense of their body and their individuated nature, that they might look around and they want to make contact with people, but that can be uncomfortable for other people who are witnessing, like they don't know how to react or something. But I think for the facilitator, if you are not comfortable with somebody looking you in the eye and like really looking at you, then you probably shouldn't be serving this medicine. That if you've got hangups about that, there's something off there, I think.
Yeah. Because that's it. I see that they're really just seeking that connection.
Yeah.
And so wanting to receive it. So to me, it's like somebody putting their hand out to you, and they're in the water, and they're like, can you just pull me a little that way?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I can't. No, this is your thing.
Yeah.
It's a thing together, right? We're both in this together.
Yeah. I just love that you've raised this point, because I think it's just vital, and it's so meaningful for people to have that. And then it can also get really interesting, where maybe you've had some of the people you've worked with describe this, but it was very common for people to look at me during the facilitation. And then afterwards, what they would often tell me is that, well, I would look at you, and then you were Jesus, and then you were the devil, and then you were an alien, and then you were an insect, and then you were a wolf, and then you were my mom, and then you were my sister, and then you were my husband, or whatever it is. And so part of what I learned through that is that as the ego is reassembling, and the person's trying to figure out, again, like, well, who am I after this experience? That often they're projecting out different possible iterations of what they might be interacting with or seeing within you. But ultimately, it's themselves. That this is part of what I like to describe, that the ego doesn't just create a sense of ourselves. It creates also what it is we think we're interacting with. So that it's not, often people think of the ego as only this one-sided thing. It's over here on my side, my ego, but actually it's me and what I think I'm interacting with, what I think I'm talking to, what I think I'm looking at, that is creating both of these at the same time. And I think it's a beautiful opportunity where people then become aware, like, wow, this is what my ego is doing, that actually I'm going out and I'm projecting on other people all the time about who I think you are and what I think your relationship is to me, versus there's moments where, and you can see it in their eyes, right? When all of a sudden they're looking at you and you can tell, like, they're seeing the universal love that is here.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, because I'm really seeing this person right now, and they are really seeing me, and they're seeing that actually this is the unity, and it's present right here in this moment. And that's where, again, if people aren't looking other people in the eye, they don't get that experience. They don't get that teaching and that learning, and it's just vital. So, bravo! I'm glad you do it. I'm glad you called it out, man.
Thanks. I believe it's such a huge piece for the depth of the medicine and seeing the medicine from that world and pulling it into this world, because we have that depth within ourselves, right? And I think they need a reflection in that space. And that's the time to really just have nothing there, right? To be the depth, to embrace it in ourselves.
Yeah. And I also like that you mentioned that you work with the medicine of offering people up to 3 rounds of the medicine. That was my model as well. And that's, I know that there's some people who work in the 5-MeO world and maybe they're pressed for time, or like, I got to get to the next person or whatever it is. And some people just like, no, you get one experience today, and if you want another one, you come back another time or something like that. But what I love about this story that you just shared is that I like to view it as an overall energetic process. And that what I found is doing 3 rounds of medicine would usually bring people to a completion of their energetic process. So like you were saying, with maybe rounds 1 and 2, maybe someone has to do a lot of purging. Or maybe round 1, maybe they're resisting the purge. And then round 2, they're actually getting to that purge. And then round 3, they're getting to the universal love and the full surrender and letting go. But if we stopped at 1, then they would be stuck in a place of resistance. If we stopped at 2, then they would just be, well, I've purged out, but I'm not complete. And so I like to see this nice energetic arc. And that I think it's very, very limiting if people are just offering one hit or one round of the medicine and then saying, well, now you're done, now go integrate that it's not really respectful of the energetic process of what's possible. And like you described with this woman, that sometimes what happens is people do need to do a lot of purging before they release into the fully surrendered state. Other people, they hit the fully surrendered state right off, but then if you give them more, then they're doing some purging, because it can go the other direction as well. And it's that idea that we're respecting the energetic process. It's not just a one-off experience, but we're here to work with it. And so I love that that's the way that you're describing how you're working with it, of giving people the opportunity to go through the arc and to have these different layers of the experience show up, and not just treat it as you had a big bang, that's one-off, come back another day if you want more. But actually working with people, I think, is really, really valuable.
Yeah, thanks. And part of that, as you know, is the ego. Sometimes there's just a layer or 2 of the ego that is humble and ready to be shed to actually have the deep dive. And if so, I totally want to hold space for that. Sometimes I've worked with people and even we'll just try maybe the second time, and I can see that they're just going to stay in that place, and that'll be that.
Yeah.
And they received whatever they're willing to receive, and then that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where I always like to say, like, kind of like what you were saying with the woman asking, like, what should I expect? And like, don't even get in there, because every person is unique. Every person is different. Every person's process is going to be different. And that I like to present people with, like, well, here's the broad range of what might be possible with 5-MeO. And I do like to educate people about that before they agree to take the medicine, so that they understand, like, this is the spectrum of what I might be getting into. But in terms of what you can expect in this event, we don't know until we get there.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And we'll see within a few seconds, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like with the 5-MeO, it's primarily one-on-one work. Like you mentioned, that the group of 7 people, like, ooh, that's a bit much for working with 5-MeO.
That was a lot. And 7 people in the medicine. It was intense. The most I've had is maybe a couple people come and they're friends and they know one another. I don't love serving people that haven't received it, like in front of others that are receiving it for the first time, because then it does paint an expectation picture.
Yeah.
So that's something that I have to handle in this space. Generally, I would prefer for them to be in another room so that they're not receiving any expectations, or to push them in one way or the other. of yes, I want to do it, or no, I'm scared to do it now. So yeah, generally my work has been one-on-one, which I prefer.
Yeah. The way that I always treated it was if there was more than one person that was going to be having an experience and they wanted to witness each other, I always say before we start, like, don't expect that your experience is going to be anything like what this person is experiencing. That you might, but this is a very unique and individuated process. And that what we're going to be doing is really revealing where this person is at and what they need, and that you're not this person. So right. Your experience is going to be different. And I especially always emphasize that with couples, because sometimes couples would be like, we want to have the same experience. It's like, you're not going to. You're different people.
Yeah. You're different snowflakes.
Yeah. So, Shuan, how do you grapple, or how do you deal with the fact that you're serving medicines? And I mean, you've got your website, you are public about this. How do you personally deal with the legal situation around these medicines? What's your approach to it? What's your feelings on it?
With as much grace as possible. I am mindful of the wording I use and do my best to just be careful with things. I'm one of those hippies that doesn't do Siri or Alexa so that I'm constantly being listened to, like those levels of things, just to be cautious and mindful. I don't do the face recognition camera. I don't do those things, that to me is just puts more of my information out there and makes it available. But then also I have to balance it with this world, right? Where everyone, for the most part, is receiving what's going on through a screen, either their phone or their computer, whatever that is. It's some level of internet communication, right? So this is where I'm embracing the aspects of social media, and it's been a very interesting growth process with embracing like Instagram and Facebook with this world, which for a while I was like, oh heck no, I know. And so now it's evolving. And then I also have groups of people that work with me, and so I have compiled groups that I message directly. And so it's funny though, a couple of people have actually shared, well, these encrypted messengers like Signal and Telegram, that's probably just right where they're searching, because that's right where this is going to be. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably true. And yet at the same time, I do my best. That's it. I just do my best with all of it. And at the same time, I think it's important for people to know about this work.
Yeah. It definitely is a tricky balance of, because I'm sure you're of the same opinion as myself. Like, there's nothing wrong with this work. There's no reason it should be illegal in any capacity. These things should not be illegal. But it's edgy putting yourself out there, making it, public, having a website. I work as sort of a mentoring position with a lot of people who serve medicine here and there. And they're always asking me like, well, how public should I be or shouldn't I be, or how do I do it? And, so I talk to people, well, sometimes people create a church so that they could have that, or maybe they advertise their services as being offered in Mexico or in Canada. I said, but then there's other people who are just very open about, this is what I'm doing and this is where I am. And that really it's about finding your own level of trust and comfort with that. But there's no universal answer for how do I be a medicine person in the modern American landscape.
Yeah. There is this beautiful process that I'm going to do. I'm just learning about it, where you can actually get your social security number to be your own, so that you're not an entity of the government. And so within this, there's this whole process you go through where essentially you own the rights to your own social security number. You are a sovereign being, a sovereign entity in the government. And then you have your own trust, like foreign trust. And then you can set within that a domestic trust. So all in all, legally, you are a diplomat. And so you're only bound to things if you murder someone, you steal, you do things like that, but you still have a level of diplomatic protection. So that is definitely something I am going to be working on this year as well.
Yeah, interesting. So you're going the sovereign citizen route.
Yeah.
So, Shuan, I've had you for a while here. We got started a little bit late, so I do want to let you go. But before, there's two more things that I want to talk about. One is I just would like to invite you to share a little bit more about your website and the different offerings that you have there and how people can go about contacting you or working with you. So this is your chance to kind of plug the website and your services. Anything you'd like to say about that there?
Okay. Yeah, the website is definitely something that took me time and some refinement to really get to creating, and this year refining it so that it was much more a reflection of the person that I am now and my offerings, my heartfelt offerings. So there's a decent amount of information there about me. My services are somewhat vague as to the specificity of the medicines, which we've discussed. So yeah, I do love holding containers for groups or individually with ayahuasca, with psilocybin, and with 5-MeO. Again, with 5-MeO, as you and I know, that is a specific thing that people need to truly be called to sit with. I had someone reach out to me here in LA. He's like, I've done 5-MeO 102 times. Like, when can we set it up? And then instantly I'm like, I don't know that we need to.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's like at a point, what are you trying to get? What are you trying to do that you haven't done?
Yeah.
What are you seeking?
Yeah.
Doesn't seem like you're seeking what you're getting. So yeah, those are my primary offerings, and either individually or in a group. And then I also offer preparation and integration coaching and help, whether it's people that have worked with me or otherwise. I'm technically a certified life coach. You know, everyone loves to hear the certification thing nowadays.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like those things. But yeah, this is also too where like my personal training background is beneficial because it helps like the whole well-rounded picture.
Yeah.
And also this incredible wisdom I gained from the Vedic monk that I was studying from, you know, around diet and energetic and just meditation practice, you know, like things like that, how they can really help support this work. So, but yeah, those are my primary offerings.
Awesome. So to remind the audience again, and there'll be a link in the website, or excuse me, in the podcast notes for the website, is divineguidance.me. I like that. I like the me there. Now, just one last thing I just wanted to touch on, because it's current and it's up. So I don't know if the audience caught it, but you did mention that your home is in Asheville in North Carolina. And this is where Hurricane Helene really did some serious damage. And you've been in LA, but I think you're going to be going back home sometime shortly. What's the update for your connections in Asheville? How are people doing that you know of in the area that obviously, I mean, it's just really devastated, really hardly hit, but
yeah, for the most part, the people that I know directly have all fared well. I think everyone's home is pretty good overall. One friend, she didn't tell me specifics. I know she was down where the floods were up to roof levels. So I imagine her home might be just gone. And my daughter's boyfriend, he lost 11 family members. And I'm sure I've met a bunch of them, maybe all of them. So that is a pretty hefty toll, especially for one person to be experiencing. So
yeah.
Beyond that, I know that the property damage to people I know hasn't been immense. My daughter's driveway was completely washed out to where they have to, like, they're supposed to pay $100,000 now to regrade the property just to make it drivable again on any level. So there's a lot of things like that. And I just got water earlier this week for the first time at my place. And some people still don't have water. I think a decent amount of people are functioning now with electricity and water. And then for those that have a well, as soon as they have electricity, they're good to go because they have the well. So there's definitely these challenges that people are still working through. A lot of people don't have internet. Last I know, I still didn't have internet, but you can go to like Publix or I think maybe Starbucks, things like that. They have internet. So there's definitely a lot of volunteer work happening, which is really beautiful. The community seems to really be pulling together, and there's support out there, which is really nice. And it's very interesting, too, that I was on one of the last flights to come here right before it happened.
Yeah.
I'm going back Wednesday. So I will be back, to be able to clearly see what happened, but also to be able to help chip in as well. And yeah, definitely a big growth process for the community and challenging us all to come together.
Yeah. Well, I just want to extend my best wishes to you and everyone else there. I'm sure it's probably going to be hard to get back there and actually, see how people are grappling with all of this, and literally digging out from the mud and trying to rebuild. That I think it's probably going to be taking years for all of that to come back to some kind of functional state. And so I don't envy you. I don't envy the process, but I definitely wish you the best for all of that and all of your personal connections there. And then everybody else that we don't know who are there, that I'm sure it's really deeply traumatic for everyone. And there's going to be a lot of need for healing and processing. And so I wish you all the best with that and for all of your friends and family.
Much appreciated. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Shuan. I've really enjoyed getting a chance to know you even a little bit more, to hear more of your story, your practices, your process. And it's been nice to have been kind of thrown into this connection with you.
Yeah, very nice. It's so good to know you now on these levels. Yeah, really good to connect and to consider you as a friend now.
Yeah. Well, beautiful, Shuan. I'm sure we'll connect more again in the future, but thank you so much for your time today. And thank you also with the patience of overcoming our technological difficulties for today so that we could make this happen.
Yeah, thank you as well for hanging in there for me to work it out on my end.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to let you go. Enjoy the rest of your day down there in LA. Is it a warm day in LA today?
Yeah, pretty warm. Yeah. I mean, I'm over by the beach, so it's cooler. It's like kind of perfect.
Yeah.
So, blue skies, it's beautiful. I'm right by, I can see the ocean out the window. It's fantastic.
All right. Well, don't enjoy yourself too much then.
Thanks. All right. Stay awesome.
All right, man.
Bye.